Where we are headed, we will need some heat in this boat. Hello, I'm Patrick.
And I'm Rebecca.
On the Valiant 40 Brick House.
And we're going to show you how we stay warm or get hot on Brick House.
Let me show you on the paper chart why we need all this heat. We get these charts from Blue Water Books and Charts in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so we're over here in the Cape Town area. Go up to St. Helena, follow the Atlantic winds right on down the coast to Uruguay, and then down on south. Where we will be down here in South America is another 1,000 miles south of where we are now. So if we think it's getting a little chilly in the evening, it's going to be cold down here. We need to pack on the heat. Isla Grande de Tierra del Fuego. Only the name is warm. So let me show you now just what we did to install the Cubic Mini, which I'm sure we're going to get a lot of good use. Come on in and I'll show you what we have to make heat in this boat when it gets chilly. We'll come back to that one in just a minute. That is the main idea of this whole video. So we have this little space heater, but that doesn't work unless we're on shore power. Underneath this chart table seat, we have a heater that would be very similar to a car heater. There's a radiator here, a fan here to blow air out. This is the water hoses coming off of the diesel engine. These hoses also heat our fresh water in our newly installed water tank. The water tank was made by Torrid Marine. Nice stainless steel tank. We'll get into that video at a future date. But these go all the way back to the engine room. And on this side of the heater, we have these two vents. So we can direct the air, the hot air back and the hot air forward, just like in a car. And up here on the wall, a 2-speed switch, high and low. But of course that operates off the engine, and we have to have the engine heated up and operating for that to work. We've used it, it really works great. Another option is this pressure kerosene lantern. It puts out a lot of light and a lot of heat, and of course a bit of carbon monoxide. So that's only like a supplementary backup thing. We'll have a carbon monoxide detector in the boat, in the ceiling in several locations very soon. But the main idea here is our new Cubic Mini Grizzly wood burning stove, the biggest one we could fit in here. Here, the whole thing heats up very nicely, and there's a fan right here on top that when this heats up, it makes the fan spin and blows the air, the hot air around. This fan is made by Caframo, model 810 EcoFan, and we got that from Amazon. There will be a link in the video description. But we already have some wood in here. Nice, huh? So this is what we did to install our Cubic Mini Grizzly. So Rebecca, this custom mount that we had made here in South Africa, why don't you tell us about it and why we made it here rather than ordering from Cubic Mini?
Well, to be honest, it was kind of a mistake. I was carrying the wood stove and the flue pipes in my suitcase to come back here to South Africa from Rhode Island. I wanted to keep the weight down. I wanted to keep the bulk down. And the more frugal part of me thought maybe I could just go and have it locally made and save money. The problem is that it's tough to design their exact system. I thought I could look online and get the specs. Cubic Mini was great, and they tried to work with me, even though I didn't buy it from them, to get the specs right and the gauge right and the measurements right. But so I wish we had just bought it, and I wish I had just found some space for it in my luggage.
What I did was drill holes through this bulkhead and mount the custom-made mount in this position. This is this refrigerator below here, and the freezer is on the other side. So we have the bolts securely holding the top in place. I have this wood screw. I've measured just how far it can go in without penetrating into the icebox or the foam insulation inside of the icebox. And to make sure that doesn't happen, I have to pack out the bolt a little bit with the 3 washers. So all the pilot holes have been drilled. We're ready to put this in and screw it in place. With the mounting bracket securely fastened with 4 bolts onto the bulkhead, now we just simply hang the Cubic Mini onto the 2 U-hangers. Line those up and just drop them both in. And then at the bottom end, there's 2 more holes to which clips are just inserted. And so it's held in place with 4 points. But those are the tough ones to get to. I had to use needle nose pliers to get way inside to force those clips into their proper holes. I wanted everything just as high as possible so that underneath we can fit our feet. Then we don't ruin this whole bunk for sleeping purposes or for storage underneath. Also had to have this mount over enough so we can open the door behind this backrest to get to all of our valuable storage behind it. On this side, this teak cap overhangs. So on this side, I did not want to cut that cap back for this mounting bracket to fit flush. I used a piece of vermiculite. This is 5/8 of an inch thick, which is about 13 millimeters thick, as a backer board and also additional insulation to the wood bulkhead. This part of the insulating mount is actually hollow on the inside. So air comes up through the bottom and out these holes on the top. The same hollow panel design used on the back side of the Cubic Mini is vital to keep any heat buildup from transmitting to the wooden bulkhead. And we have this one to mount on this side to help keep all that hot air away from the cushion and our storage area over here. And on this side, on the starboard side, we just have a little deflector. We also do have one of these custom mounts that we can put on this side, but if we so choose. But I think this little deflector is going to be plenty good to keep heat away from the plywood bulkhead and also allow hot air to come off to the side and circulate through the cabin. This vermiculite is the same material that the insulating bricks inside of the stove are made of, and it's the same thickness, 5/8 of an inch, 13 millimeters. So it's very easy to cut with a saber saw or a table saw. It's actually pretty soft. If I took my hand and rubbed it across, it'd probably flake off, kind of like styrofoam balls do. So as it's set up here, heat will actually come up through this insulated pipe, because this is an outer core. It goes up through here and then out through the top. So my job today is to figure out where the center is, so I can drill a pilot hole up here and then measure from the outside where I'm going to cut the circle for the stovepipe to come up and for this cap to mount. The flue really needs to be a straight shot, straight up, no elbows, no angles. So none of this will be seen from the inside, but this venting plate will. So the hole that I'll be cutting up here later today will be big enough that it'll be coming around all of these vent holes, so air will come up through here and circulating around in this area to help keep everything cool. Now, the big concern that I have is just how high should we make this stack? Actually, the higher the stack, the better for drawing hot air out of the Cubic Mini. But we can't go sailing around with a stack that's like, 2 feet or a meter off the deck of the boat. We will have just this end cap, which will have a weather cap on it. But when we go to use the Cubic Mini, then we'll add this stack and then use the cap on top of that. This cap is like a wind deflector, and if everything works properly, the wind will actually go through here and help draw hot air out of the stove. These parts are all made by Dickinson Marine, and we ordered them through Fishery Supply in Seattle, Washington. Fishery Supply, that's a misleading name. Although they sell a lot of fishing equipment and commercial fishing gear, they sell a lot of sailboat and powerboat equipment. So what we will be using while we're traveling is just this on the deck. We'll get rid of any stacks and the cap, and just put this cap on top to help keep rainwater and seawater out. But the problem here is these are just tack welds around the base and at the seams. The same for the cap. I can look inside of here and actually see daylight coming out the bottom where the tack welds are. So you can't imagine how tremendous waves can be washing over the boat. Waves will back up through here and get inside and come through the boat. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. Although this is tack weld around this perimeter. There's a lot of little welds on the seam. We'll put some water in here, and you can see it just dripping out. If water can come out, water will certainly get in. So on the inside of the cap here, I'll be using high temperature silicone to seal the inside edges on this cap, and also way down inside here I'll be sealing it up very well to make sure that any water that splashes around this area does not come back through the seams or the welds. High temperature silicone is incredible stuff. It has a very high temperature rating, although when we put this cap back on, all of this should be pretty well cooled off. But I don't want to take any chances of any mistakes, so we'll be using the good stuff. I wouldn't use just regular silicone on this. So that's my project today. Let's get started. I'll figure out where the hole is, drill up, and start cutting a big hole in the top of the boat. Okay, so I want to project up here, figure out where I'm going to be making these holes. You know, you always hate cutting holes in your boat and then thinking you're ruining the cosmetics and everything else. But let's see, what can I do here? Okay, so to get a projection up, I'm going to take this beware of the dog sign, which we only have a cat on this boat, but you know, grandiose ideas. And I'm going to roll it up here. Okay, that gives me this inside projection. Actually, let me bring this back down. I sure would like to avoid that trim strip and bring everything this way.
How about if you took the wood strip down, put it on there, and then put the wood strip over it? Because you're not doing it over the holes. You're
that's
just
a good
doing it over
idea.
the trim.
Okay, that's what we'll do then.
Yeah, I think it looks good all the way around.
Okay. And I'll see if I can just make some marks around this outside perimeter and then find a center point from that. Come up here. So whenever we take things apart, I have a dedicated jar for any screws that come out. Certainly helps for reassembly later on trying to find parts, as long as I can find the jar. Okay, so from the aft end of this window to, let's see, where's that center point right here? That's about 29 inches, 740 millimeters. We'll see where we come up outside. That brings us to about right here. Okay, I'm going to shift this off this way just a little bit, so this venting plate, the edge of it will wind up halfway onto the trim strip that goes here. These holes will be just on the outside of that trim strip. And we need to mark the inside of this hole here, Rebecca. I can drill up through it. The diameter of this drill bit doesn't matter, it's the length that does. We have our center hole right here. Put the ring over it, get the dirt out of the way, mark it out. We have a 3-inch diameter flue, so I am making a 5-inch diameter hole. There needs to be at least 1-inch clearance all the way around the flue as it comes up through the deck. Drill some more relief holes here for when we cut. I don't want to have to start cutting here all the way out to the end and then make a circle. I'll start right out here on the circle. Okay, what I'm going to do is drill 2 more holes, side by side to make sure they're wide enough for the saber saw blade to fit into, so I can go ahead and cut the circle. Rather than going to the store to get supplies, sometimes it's faster and easier just to pull what I need out of the dumpster. And a drop cloth covers everything for good measure. I'm using an Allen wrench in the electric drill to knock the balsa coring out of the way, and then we'll go back and refill the void with thickened epoxy resin. Do you see that green bonding wire in the bottom right of the hole? It got nicked by the saber saw, but we don't use that bonding wire anyway, so we got lucky on that one. This is epoxy resin thickened with Cabosil, and I want to cram it just as much as I can back into these voids to make sure everything is filled solid with the epoxy. So now I set the rubber seal in place and then the deck fitting on top of that, and drilled pilot holes down through each of the mounting holes in the deck fitting. I wanted to make absolutely sure that these screws were going into solid epoxy resin and not into any kind of a void or missed balsa coring. A bit of drum sanding will smoothen out the epoxy resin and get it ready for the next step of laying in some fiberglass cloth vertically. I want to put this plastic up in here, up in this slot, just to make sure that no resin drips down past there and causes a problem inside of the cabin here or on our ceiling. Okay, that's looking pretty good from below. Oops, a little bit here. Two layers of lightweight boat cloth will be extra insurance to make sure that no water can get past the rubber seal or even the high temperature silicone I'll be sealing this whole area with. I'm going to pull this tape up before this epoxy resin sets up completely. I don't want to glue all of this to the surface and then have to scrape and chip it out. So this is still a little soft. Well, it is soft. And while the resin is still soft, this is a good time to make sure that the rubber sealing ring can fit over it. That vertical fiberglass flange, it's going to actually be able to extend a little further back up into this cone area. So I'm going to not cut it flush with the sealing gasket, but raise it up just 1/8 of an inch. But there was enough room. I could have raised it up 1/2 or even 3/4 of an inch would have been better. Surprisingly, the epoxy did adhere pretty darn well to this old plastic sheeting, but the Dremel tool was a good tool to cut it all out with. Oops. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? I've watched a lot of Cubic Mini installations on YouTube, and I hadn't seen anybody else install a metal heat shield up in the ceiling area. And only after we completed this installation did we contact Cubic Mini and went over the details. And they said, yes, we should install a piece of metal like a 5-inch diameter flue cut to the proper size in this area as an extra heat shield. Copper or aluminum won't work. They transmit too much heat, so it has to be stainless steel. I'm not going to rip out the whole deck and do it all over. I will be able to cut the piece to the height that I need and then cut it lengthwise, slip it over the existing pipe and up into this void area to help give the protection that Cubic Mini would like to see. And let's connect some pipes. So this one will go on top of here, and this one is going to fit. This will go inside the inner pipe and this will go outside the outer pipe. But before we do anything else, we need to take the Mini outside and start a fire in the box just as hot as we can and let that go for anywhere between 1 and 3 hours to help cure the paint and reduce any kind of odor or smoking after we do install it in the boat permanently. So with the burn complete, now we can set up the pipes to go up through the ceiling and join up with the deck fitting and determine just where to cut one of the pipes to make it all fit and go ahead and complete the installation. Okay, so this deck cap is going to sit right flush, right down on top of the fiberglass top. This will be projecting up into it. And I want it to come up, this will be going down over this inner pipe. For this application, the deck fitting is made wrong. It does not fit inside of the pipe where it should. It will only fit in that slot between the inner and outer pipe, but the tack welds are in the way. So it just won't fit on this end. So I've got to cut this pipe coming up through the deck in an area that's just the proper height. And I want this, though, the inner pipe, to project up in here 1 and 1/2 inches past the deck. So it'll come up right about here. I don't want to cram it up all the way to the top. So what I'm going to do is take this rubber sealing ring out of here. This is 1 and 1/2, so I'm just going to take this and mark it at 1 and 1/2 inches all the way around. Running a line of tape around to match up all of these marks will make it a lot easier and much more precise for making the cut. With an angle grinder with a metal cutting blade in it, this is far easier than using a saber saw. You know, when this pipe goes together, this one goes actually inside here. That seems a little counterintuitive because, like, you'd think smoke would then be able to come out and around. But there is a flange that the pipe rests on inside of the stove. Creosote that builds up in the stack will then, as it drips back down, which it's going to happen with any wood burning stove, that creosote will drip down into the stove and then get reburned. If it dripped down the outside, you would have a tremendous mess dripping down around the top of the stove. And this insulator part, of course, goes on the outside. This insulator pipes help to keep the gases inside of the flue pipe hot for proper venting, but this outside pipe will also get very hot to the touch, so it shouldn't be touched when there's a good fire going inside of the Cubic Mini. Now it's time to put it all together. I would never rely on just a gasket to seal on a sailboat installation like this, so I'll use a liberal amount of high temperature silicone to help out. Before inserting the inner pipe, the one that carries all the hot gases out of the Cubic Mini, into the deck fitting, I smeared the joining surfaces with high temperature silicone. Now on the outer flange and everything else, I'll also use the high temperature silicone to help seal the entire join and make sure it's waterproof. A good dab of silicone will go on all the screw holes to help seal the screw heads. Silicone will be used to seal up some of these joins that are just tack welded or overlapped to help make sure no water can get in. Mineral spirits and paper towels does a very good job of cleaning up the excess before the silicone has a chance to dry. While we're here, let me show you one mistake that I made. This coach roof has a slight slope off to the port side for drainage. When I installed the deck flange, I just screwed everything down evenly and I didn't compensate for this slope. I could have just tightened down the inside uphill screws and left the downhill side screws a little bit loose and let the silicone sealant make up that slope. or I could have made something out of plastic, a wedge to help make this level. Why that's a problem, now this pipe comes down inside at an angle. I didn't think it was going to be that much of a problem. I thought it would just twist and, you know, self-find its vertical, but it didn't. So it's a bit of a tight squeeze inside. I can make everything go together pretty nicely, but it's just not a natural fit. I have to force it. It would have been better to compensate for this deck slope. We have a couple snags here. Everything is set up, and we can pull the rain cap off. This will fit very nicely on top, but the thing is, I just don't like how low it is to the boat. If we have fire in the firebox, smoke is coming out here, I want this higher up to have better dispersion of the smoke away from the boat. So in order to do that, we have an extra stack pipe here. It'll fit in very nicely. Well, almost nicely. It's rather loose. But the problem is, this will not fit in the top. It will not fit inside of the flue pipe like it should. So, but it will fit improperly on the outside of the flue pipe on this end. So, I'm thinking what to do. I'm going to just cut the top off here and get rid of this crimped area. So we'll have, that'll actually also eliminate the welds holding this double pipe together, but that's fine. All right, so what I did, I took that angle grinder and cut this flanged end because it's welded, tack welded in one section. That makes it so you come out with two pieces. So now this will fit inside here. The cap is not made properly. It fits on the outside. It should be going in the inside, but we have to live with it. So we could just leave it like that and use our Cubic Mini. It would suffice on a fairly calm day with the wind not really blowing hard. It's a little wobbly, but it's really best to have the double pipe on here to help keep this part of the flue hot. This helps with the airflow. We don't want a cold flue up here. So we just take our other section, put it over the top. I have cut 3 slits along the bottom, 1, 2, and 3. So it fits down very nicely over the base here, but I can put a hose clamp on here if I feel like we need to, and that'll hold it nice and tight. On the top now, this will go back down outside of the flue pipe. And the inside of the second wall, this fits down inside. Good snug fit. And we're good to go. Ready for a fire. And when we are ready to cross an ocean, we'll just use a little Gorilla Tape around these seams just for extra security.
So when we decided we needed some serious bits of heat on Brickhouse before we could go to Patagonia or anywhere cold, I did a thorough research of everything that would work for a 40-foot boat. And a couple things that were my fundamental requirements were a dry heat. Right now we're using in South Africa a quartz heater, and it's making massive amounts of mildew and all the
humidity in a living space is part of the air that goes into the firebox and out the chimney. That air in the living space has to be replaced somehow, and it comes from the drier outside air, so it reduces the humidity in the living space. And this is what happens with a wood stove.
1. And 2, we wanted something that used a fuel that would be easily gotten while we're in Patagonia, where there's not a lot of stores, there's not a lot of gas stations, there's not a lot of anything there, and we might be down there for 6 months. And we also don't have an abundance of electric power on Brickhouse, so we needed something that wouldn't use a lot of electricity and wouldn't have us struggling to replenish that electricity all the time as we stayed warm. Installation was also an issue. We didn't want a complicated system. So the first thing we considered, because Brickhouse used to have an SBAR heater on the boat, which is a diesel-powered and electricity-powered unit, and you have ducts that go all over the boat. So we kind of ruled that out fairly early. 1, because everybody that we talked to that had a heater like that loved it, but It was broken on every last boat that we asked. They loved it, but it was broken right. Also, because of the electricity that it uses a good amount of electricity every hour that you're running it. The second thing that we considered was a propane stove, a propane like a Dickinson Marine kind of thing. But the problem that we come back to with that is that propane is a very wet heat. So, all of our closets, everything inside of all of our bunks, everything would be moist, and you're not going to be that warm if you have a moist heat going on. To go around for 6 months, we'd need 12 bottles, 12 big bottles, the kind that you put on your cookers at home. We're not storing 12 on the decks of Brick House. The other solution was maybe a Dickinson Marine diesel heater that has an electric assist on it, which that was a consideration as well, except for the biggest unit that they make isn't really going to heat Brick House. So what we ended up with, what made the most sense for us was to get a little wood stove. So we went with Cubic Mini Grizzly, and they're out of Canada. But this is a tiny little thing. We had to do a lot of comparison between their Cub model and their Grizzly model to see what would heat our boat the best. Grizzly stove from Cubic Mini covers a square area of up to 400 meters. I calculated our square meters very roughly, and I think we're at around 300. The Cub covers about 200 square meters. So that one I think was going to be too small, and it's only a matter of an inch on each side, so we went with the bigger one to make sure we'll be plenty warm. And also so we can have a tiny bit bigger logs and a little bit more capacity to burn a little bit longer. So we decided that wood was the most economical for us, and wood would be the most easily found. So we've installed the Cubic Mini Grizzly. It's a cute little stove. It heats very nicely, and can't wait to start using it even more.